Hey, remember this little chestnut from last summer?
How many people live in Iran, by the way?
I don't know the population.
At all?
No, I don't know the population.
You don't know the population of the country you seek to topple?
How many people live in Iran?
92 million.
Okay. Yeah,
How could you not know that?
I don't sit around memorizing population tables.
Well, it's kind of relevant because you're calling for the overthrow of the government.
Why is it relevant whether it's,
because,
it's 90 million or 80 million or 100 million? Why is that relevant?
Because if you don't know anything about the country...
I didn't say I don't know anything about
Okay, what's the ethnic mix of Iran?
They are Persians and predominantly Shia. Okay,
it's not even. You don't know anything about Iran, so
okay, I am not the Tucker Carlson expert on Iran.
You're a senator who's calling for the overthrow of the government.
You're the one who
don't know anything about the country.
It is always a dark day in journalism when Tucker Carlson makes a good point. On the other hand, it's always a great day when Ted Cruz gets shit on.
Look, Daddy, teacher says every time
Ted Cruz gets shit on,
an angel gets his wings.
That's right. That's right.
I've been thinking about this clip since the beginning of the Iran war, not because of the debate around the war itself, but because I think it actually reveals a deeper truth about America's psyche. The point that Tucker is making here isn't that Americans and Israelis care so much about the Iranian people, or even that we're interested in larger regional stability. The point he's making is that this is just a symptom of what America loves doing most, toppling dictatorships. Girlie loves to topple a dictatorship.
Toppling a dictatorship.
So how do you like North Shore?
It's up there with apple pie. It's what has defined the United States for the past century, probably more than anything, along with making food based on cultures that don't actually make that food themselves, but I will never apologize for Tex-Mex. Today, I actually wanted to talk about how these types of governments fall as a whole, because dictatorships come in all shapes and sizes. They're just as diverse, if not more so in some ways, than democracies are, and we certainly don't treat them that way when we invade them. So I wanted to do some research beyond Iran, beyond even the Middle East, and find some research that captures how dictatorships are born and how they exist, and then also how they collapse. It's hard though, because if only there was some sort of science for politics, if only there was some sort of... Sorry, 1 second. Hello. Oh, political science. Sorry, come again? A banana? Barbara Geddes is a professor emeritus at UCLA's political science department. In 2018, she published a book along with 2 of her colleagues called How Dictatorships Work, which created an enormous amount of data and analysis based on over 200 dictatorships that have existed since World War II.
In my field, which is political science, people had overwhelmingly studied democracies, but most people in the world lived in dictatorships. My most basic idea was that there were big differences across dictatorships, that they weren't all that similar to each other. My background is in Latin America, so I had a lot of familiarity with military regimes. But when you look at the rest of the world, that's not such a common kind of dictatorship worldwide.
Listen, before we get into this book has an enormous amount of data and information. I've decided that the best way to tackle the most important aspects of this book is to begin by covering some of the basic vocabulary and variables that help define the kind of dictatorships that we have to deal with, including Iran. So first off, there are 2 major categories that a dictatorship administration can fall into. There are military-led dictatorships and inherited party dictatorships.
Military dictatorships, there are 2 ways of defining them. One is just to say anything is a military dictatorship if it's led by someone whose previous career was in the military or the security apparatus. And there are loads of dictatorships that are led by such people. They order their soldiers to surround the presidential palace. Sometimes the soldiers don't even know that that's what they're doing. And they have automatic followers who will do what they, who are supposed to follow orders. So it's just a lot easier for them to overthrow governments. And all dictators have to rely on force at some level. It's not always the formal military that's the main supporter. On the inherited parties, the idea that we were trying to get at was that party-led regimes are often very stable. We discovered that there is a difference between those regimes that were based on inherited parties, that is, parties that had been organized before the regime took power and that were already engaged in some kind of effort at mass organization. So any party that had a grassroots organization before it seized power, or before it backslid if it had been democratically elected, had a better chance of surviving crises than did non-party governments or the governments of parties that were created post-seizure of power.
There's also a third word that we have to know to understand how these dictatorships are run, and it's called personalism.
So we define personalism as meaning that the dictator himself has concentrated large amounts of power over the rest of the inner circle and his support coalition. So the thing that's at issue is there anyone else in the inner circle who really can constrain what the dictator can do, both in terms of policy and international adventurism, and also just in terms of how repressive or how violent he can be toward other members of the inner circle.
It's actually an important thing to note first that none of these definitions are mutually exclusive. Personalism, or the administration of a dictatorship, can change from generation to generation. Dictatorships change over time the same way that democracies do. They evolve. Actually, Iraq. Sorry, one more time.
The Iraq,
which is where I'm based right now, is a fantastic example of how these three variables can kind of blend together in strange ways. On July 17th in 1968, a peaceful coup led to the beginning of the Ba'athist regime in Iraq. Now, the coup was led by Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr, who was actually a field marshal in the Iraqi military before becoming the country's fourth president. So you would think that this would mean that the Iraqi government was being led by a military-led dictatorship. And you would be right, sort of, because the Ba'athist Party also existed 20 years beforehand and was actually created in Syria. So you could also argue the July 17th revolution led to an inherited party dictatorship. And you would be right about that, sort of. A decade later, Saddam Hussein takes power, and 6 days into his administration, he gives a famous speech where he purges the inside Ba'athist party of his own government, accusing them of treason, which begins the era of Iraq becoming a personalized dictatorship. So it's interesting to note that the military-led coup and the government that came with it in 1968 looks fundamentally different from the Ba'athist party that falls in 2003. This is a fantastic example of how much a dictatorship can change over time. So now that we have some basic definitions of how dictatorships are defined, let's look at how they can collapse. There are several different categories that Professor Geddes highlights in her research, but the most common way that dictatorships fall, according to her data, is a coup, which kind of makes sense.
Just because they have the guns. So for any other kind of overthrow requires people to take risks. Well, I mean, the military has to take risks too, but to solve a terrible collective action problem is a way that political scientists would put it. And so what I mean by that is that a lot of people have to cooperate to get to overthrow the regime, either through elections or demonstrations or even through insurgency. Those people are taking risks and paying costs regardless of whether without knowing whether they're going to be successful.
Based on the data laid out in her book, a foreign-imposed takeover and occupation represents only a small fraction of how dictatorships collapse, which if you're an American watching this video, may come across as genuinely surprising. Most dictatorships collapse internally, or maybe more importantly, most dictatorships are only able to collapse internally. There's a reason why I say it like that. Every dictatorship has an elite circle. There's always a group of people in power around the dictator who stand to benefit the most from the dictatorship. So possibly the best way of examining whether a dictatorship is about to collapse or not is not by examining the economy or any kind of outside pressure, but actually by examining the elite inner circle and seeing what they're doing.
Have you noticed that our caps have actually got little pictures of skulls on them?
I don't,
Hands. Are we the baddies?
There's actually a formula that helps with this. Don't worry, we're not doing math today. I would never do that to you. Since we're going to focus on Iran today, I'm going to give you 3 letters from this equation that I think are the most important variables. P, C, and T. P is the probability that the status quo will survive.
Well, it's just the idea that people's understanding of how high the costs of opposition will be, and also how high the benefits, if they've been getting benefits from the regime, whether they're likely to continue in the future. So if people believe that the regime's likely to fall, then those who've been receiving benefits may decide that they are better off if they jump ship, because their benefits are likely to disappear anyway.
C is the cost of opposing the regime.
Well, that's the danger or cost to your career that opposition figures normally face, and that's higher in more repressive regimes than it is in more sort of routinized ones. So if you're thinking about opposition in Mexico before the PRI fell, it was not very costly at all. In Iran, it's been fairly costly recently, and in China, it's costly still. And so in some places, it's very, potentially life-threatening.
And lastly, T, which is probably the most important one from an outsider perspective, is the probability that the regime will turn out as anticipated.
This was our effort to get at what we thought was a problem among U.S. policymakers and journalists to some extent, of having very optimistic ideas about what was likely to happen after a dictatorship falls. It just is a way of building into people's to thinking about how ordinary or high officials make these calculations, that they are a little bit less naive than outside observers are about what the likely outcome of the change is likely to be.
So now that we have a few of these variables, how can this be applied to Iran?
Iran was really different from other places that we categorized. Let me start by saying that we didn't have any other clerical regimes in the data set. If you had to classify it, you might classify it as what we called a triple threat, which means that it had elements of both military, party, and personalism. So they built an incredibly powerful military or armed wing that's been very effective for them. And I think, especially under Khamenei, it has become more personalized. And you can see that with the appointment of his son as the successor. I mean, that's not what usually happens in party-based regimes. So how will it affect what happens? Well, I think persistence is a real possibility, even despite everything. I also think that some kind of a takeover by the Republican Guard is a real possibility. If the civilian leadership doesn't seem to be able to keep things under control, I think that could happen. That's been common historically.
So maybe right now internal collapse isn't possible. Okay, what if we invade Iran?
If you were to have an occupation or something like that tried to exclude everybody who had been supporters of the current regime, that then you would get a civil war, that it would be like Iraq. I mean, you can't, it sort of seems like the right thing to do, morally, when you overthrow Saddam, to get rid of all the Baathists, but it doesn't work out well in practice to do that. And partly, if some system has been the only game in town for most of the lives of most of the people in the country, then your most ambitious and well-trained people are going to be part of that. They're going to be members of the party, because that's what they had to do in order to get an education or to get a white-collar job. Mm-hmm. And the same will be true in Iran.
It is my personal opinion that the Islamic Republic will eventually fall. But the variables that we've discussed today and the uniqueness of the regime will absolutely continue to play a role. It may be that due to the economic collapse in the country, a power shift will eventually happen internally down the road in the interest of keeping the lights on. an Islamic Republic that came to power in 1979 could be replaced by a military-led insurgency that just sees that things aren't going very well. But one of the most important things to note from this book is that over half of authoritarian regimes that collapse are not replaced by democracies. They're just replaced by new dictatorships. At the end of our conversation, I asked Professor Geddes what it was like to have completed all of this research, only to see the US and Israeli governments ignore all of these definitions and data and make the same mistakes that we made 20 years ago in Iraq.
Yeah, I think it's frustrating. I think that I don't think that anybody would have expected Trump's administration to pay any attention to expertise in the field. But it's not just expertise about how regimes fall or anything. It's they're not consulting Iran specialists. And the Bush administration, the second Bush administration before the invasion of Iraq also consulted no Middle East specialists. It's just an astonishing record, really. We have a lot of Middle East specialists in the United States. Academic departments are full of them. None of them thought that invasion was a good idea. Many different people could have told both Bush and Trump what the problems would likely be, but they didn't want to hear it. And Trump especially he didn't even pay attention to the military advisors who told him that the Strait of Hormuz would be blocked if we did this. So, that's willful ignorance and just a very profound arrogance about the amount of power that the US has and what it can accomplish in the world.
It's been a long month, and the outcome of this is still anyone's guess. But I think there is something to be said about this terrible addiction that the United States has when it comes to toppling dictatorships. And I do mean addiction. It's like a drug. We are chasing this immediate release and neglecting the withdrawal, the hangover. A hangover that could be avoided if we simply talked to the experts that understand these types of governments so well. I think, just like journalism, there are plenty of flaws in academic categorization of systems of government that are very complex and fluid and can change on a dime. But if we ignore the data that's right in front of us, then all we're going to become is the data that we've been trying to ignore. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a call. Hello? What do you mean you don't know how to end the video?